Hi, I'm Joel H. Brewster, and I'm no stranger to horror. And this is a podcast where about the big and the small of the genre, with the hopes to take you from being a casual horror film fan to a horror film fanatic like myself. Today, I have a very special guest, Tori Potenza, who is a writer for Movie Jawn, as well as a co-host to the Killer Bee podcast with Garrett Smith. We're going to be talking about the 2006 James Gunn feature film directorial debut, Slither. Hi, Tori. How are you doing today?
Hi, I am great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this one because, as I was saying before we recorded here, I know a bit. Well, I'm not that heavy into B movies, and this was kind of like a homage to B movies. So I thought I would get someone that's more of an expert than myself to talk about this, and I've wanted to talk about this movie as well as speak to you. So yeah, I'm really excited to get into this.
Yeah, it's funny. This was like one of the first movies I did on like one of my old podcasts when I first started podcasting. So this is like actually kind of a throwback because I think that was one of the first times I had watched this movie. So it was kind of fun to return to.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I hadn't seen the movie since I think I've seen it twice before. And I think I saw it when it first came out, which was forever ago. And then I saw it like somewhere later along the line. And then it's been a while since I saw it. So I was excited to get into Slither again. But before we do that, would you like to introduce yourself further than what I just spouted off there about Movie Jawn and the Killer Bee podcast?
Sure. So I'm Tori. I'm based in Philadelphia, PA. I write for Movie Jawn. I had been writing for Cinema 76, and then Movie Jawn and Cinema 6 kind of came together, and we all decided that we would be Movie Jawn, which is fun. So I've been writing like about horror and other movies for like maybe 3-ish years with them now. I also started podcasting around that time. I was on a podcast called Butter with That with a bunch of friends that I used to work with. And then my partner and I decided we wanted to do a podcast together because we were both podcasting with other people all the time. So why not just talk about movies when we're home together? So I think that's it. I like horror movies. I like gross stuff.
Nice. What made you guys decide to do B movies as a specialty for your podcast?
So like we're those like really annoying people whenever we watch movies, we're like immediately on IMDb being like, I recognize this person from something. What do I know them from? And then we're like going through their whole filmography and be like, oh, it's this other super trashy, weird thing we saw randomly. And kind of out of that. And then also like my partner had this idea of doing like a Dick Miller podcast because that's an actor he really loves. And he's someone who's been in like hundreds of movies. And then kind of taking that idea, we just like realized that a lot of these people like are very interesting and have really interesting filmographies. So it was cool to profile them, talk a little bit about like just them as a person, but also like it's just started to be a really interesting way to watch movies. I think like we've realized how much we like people by watching several of their movies in a row. Even watching like, we did Linda Blair, but we watched more than just The Exorcist. We watched like a bunch of her filmography, which was really fun. We realized how much we loved Pam Grier through the podcast. And we saw a bunch of like the old blaxploitation movies she did. It's been a really interesting way for us to like fall more in love with movies and like B movies specifically.
That's awesome. What I love too is from some of that, and just reminds me of a lot of myself in terms of the love for the genre. I feel that like horror and sci-fi in general, which covers a lot of B movie films, has a lot of the fandom becomes homework in a way, and I like that. Like I like that there's a lot to like study and learn from it. I'm sure other fandoms like have that as film fandoms have that as well, but there's just a lot of it's just a lot of researching, and I just enjoy that aspect of it. It just makes it more fun to watch, like you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's like so many different routes you can go in. There's, like even just like picking people is a really interesting way to like decide what weird horror movies to watch, but you can just go down a rabbit hole with a lot of weird things in this genre.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first horror movie? Like I always like to ask, like, do you remember your first horror experience? Like, what's your horror origin story? Like, what got you into it?
So I don't know if I mentioned this, like, I feel like I maybe mentioned it when we talked about like the scariest horror, but I have not always been a horror fan. I actually was like a huge scaredy cat most of my life, and was like very averse to horror and kind of avoided it whenever I could. It wasn't until like my early 20s that I really got into it. But like my early memories of horror movies, I saw one of them which is a very big B movie, is called Night of the Lepus. I don't know if it's one that you've seen.
No, it's not.
It's a very cheesy movie about killer rabbits. And like it's all like miniatures with regular sized rabbits whose like faces are covered in strawberry juice to make it look like it's actually blood and stuff. Like it's like that kind of B movie. And I'm pretty sure it was a movie that like my parents taped over my like Peter Rabbit like cartoons when I was a kid. So I think that also like scarred me pretty deeply for a while.
It's interesting. Yeah. There's always seemed to be like a rabbit sort of theme to a lot of horror. Like I was with like Night of the Lepus, you're just mentioning there, but I was just thinking of like Donnie Darko and as well. But like rabbits seem to have like this weird connection to the genre too. But like I was just when you said like the eating the berries and everything like that, I've seen like tons of images of that, and it's always just they're so cute, but it looks so violent in that end.
Yeah, and there's that opening to Us too, which I haven't seen since I saw it in theaters, but I remember that being like, oh, whoa, this is wild looking.
Yeah. So are you more of a practical, well, I'm assuming with like a lot of the films you're watching, are you more of like a practical effects versus CGI person?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I love practical effects. I love hearing the weird stories of how they like got certain things to work. I know I remember watching like after I had seen The Thing, which is like one of the movies that really got me into horror, the John Carpenter's The Thing, and listening to like some of the special features on the DVD and hearing Rob Bottin talk about how they pulled off some of the crazy like body horror moments in that. And it just made it seem so much more fun than I expected horror to be, which is like, I don't know, like a weird thing for me to discover that way. But I love that. And like right now I have like a half sister who's 10 and she's gotten really into doing like horror makeup and like doing some of like the prosthetics and things. And I'm just like, oh my God, am I like going to watch my sister grow up into like the next Tom Savini or something? That's so like, so cool. I that's like my dream for her.
Yeah. You're like watching her origin story into this, right? Like that's really cool that yeah, maybe she will be like the next big thing in it. That'd be awesome to hear.
I would be so proud.
Absolutely. Before we switch off here, the CGI versus practical effects topic, I saw recently that you posted, and this isn't a horror, but I wanted to bring this up because I love this movie that you brought up. I saw recently that you posted love for the movie Speed Racer.
Oh, yes. It's so good.
Yeah, what makes that a perfect movie for you? Because I really liked that movie when I saw it, and I feel like it like when I brought it up, like I got like a lot of heat a lot of times. So like I love that movie.
I know it's one of those movies that I always just like thought was commonly accepted that it was good, and then because it was something that I was, probably like either like high school, like early college, and I was still living at home, and it used to be on like HBO or something a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I would just always pick it up when it was on. And it was just like, I don't know, there's something about the beats of that movie. I feel like it's really well paced. Mm-hmm. I love like the storytelling style, like even that opening where you're getting all this backstory on Speed Racer and like the tragedy of like his brother and his family, while also watching him do this really big race to honor his brother. And there's something really moving about that like, and it all just like moves so fast.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so fun. It like actually looks like a comic book, which I feel like so many comic book based movies cannot do. And I've never seen anything that looks like Speed Racer.
No, it's like it has this like fun campiness to it, and I love it. And the action's awesome. Even like the physical fight scenes are awesome. But yeah, like you mentioned, the car chase scenes are like I just didn't understand that. It was like you, I was kind of shocked when I found out that people didn't like that. It's because the only thing that I think is similar, and it's not a car racing movie, but like as far as tone and the matching kind of the comic book sense in this way was Scott Pilgrim, which I liked, and I thought that like they had like similar tones in that sense.
No, that's such a good point. Yeah, like I was just thinking about like the fight scenes have very similar like editing in both of those movies. That's really interesting.
Yeah, when I saw you post about it, I'm like, okay, I hadn't thought about the movie in a while, but I remember the last time I brought it up. They told me it was a bad movie. I was like, what? Then I looked it up. I was like, oh, I actually did not know this. I was I love it.
I remember me and my sisters loving that movie. And then I brought it up a few years ago. My sister's like, oh, you mean that dumb movie you made us watch all the time? And I was like, What? I thought we were all on board, but then it like when my partner and I started dating, it was something that like we bonded over immediately, and I was like, "Ooh, you're good. Like I like you."
Yeah, I think it's so fun. I would like a reboot of that movie, but like not even a reboot. I'd like a sequel like to that movie that's like a good like keeps the
I was
exact
just saying
tone
that because there's a cliffhanger there. Like
Yeah.
I need some like I need some closure that I assume I'll never get. But
yeah. Yeah, I don't think like a sequel would do justice. Or sorry, not a sequel. I don't think a reboot would do justice. I feel like they would just completely change the tone and do something else, like try to appease people. But like, yeah, to get the cliffhanger for a sequel, get everyone back too. I'd love that.
Me too. I don't know if you're into racer trash, but there's this like group of guys that like edit films to like vaporwave music. It's so good. And I think they just stopped, but they used to do live streams all the time of different movies. And so they did Speed Racer. And I forget what else they've done, but yeah, they're like, it just like adds the like neon effects and makes it look like it's a VHS tape while also having like all this awesome like vaporwave music. So we love to just like chill out and watch those. I know they did like Heats. They did the Mario movie from the 90s too.
No way.
They do a bunch of them. Yeah.
Okay, what's it called? Racer Trash? Did you say?
Yeah, Racer Trash.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna check that out. And I'll put it in the show notes too because that sounds really really cool.
They're great.
Yeah. All right, to dive into this movie, I didn't know this was a directorial debut for James Gunn. For whatever reason, I thought it was his second movie. I don't know what I was thinking was before it, but did you know this was his feature film directorial debut?
I think I'm like, that does sound new to me. And it's it's definitely like campy B movie, but I don't know. It feels like he would have something under his belt before this. I don't know.
That's what I thought. I thought this was like I thought this was like his second movie for whatever reason. I'm like, oh, this is his like second movie, the fun one he gets to make after making like whatever appeasing movie before that. But then when I looked it up and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I think it's a strong movie for the genre. How do you think it fits as a homage to like B movies and also sci-fi horror?
Oh, I think it does like a really fun job of like, I don't know, like amplifying the camp elements of a lot of those movies. Like when I think back on, I'm going to forget, like I love Mystery Science Theater 3000. And I feel like they used to always do a lot of these like old 50s movies that it was like small town alien invasions. I mean, The Blob is like that too. And so there is always something kind of campy. There's there's a crazy cast of like side characters that all have crazy personalities. But then this movie is also like very gross.
Yeah.
So yeah. It takes like that campiness of like the 50s movies, but then amplifies it with some of that like extra body horror.
Yeah, that's what I like. It's interesting that I think Nathan Fillion described that James Gunn said to him, we're going to be making a funny movie that's not a comedy. And watching it this time, I was like, oh, that's so like there's a lot of funny characters in it, but it's not a comedy because they take like a lot of like the gore and like everything like deadly serious and like a lot of the horror aspects actually are really in there. But some of like the one-liners, and for instance, like the mayor, who's just a shitty mayor of the town, is such a classic trope in horror that I loved that character so much.
Yeah, that actor was so like, as soon as he came on screen, I'm like, oh yeah, of course you're the guy that plays the mayor. Like you're perfect at like this kind of shitty, charismatic character that's like small town guy that has like lived there forever and finally gets nominated to be mayor and just uses his power to, do whatever the fuck he wants.
Right. And it was interesting too, when I was watching this movie, my wife pointed out, she goes that like everyone in this cast, and this is like not to like slam the cast or anything like that, but everyone in this cast wasn't like the conventional like one supermodel, one like like when like they make small town movies, it's like The Rock is a small town sheriff. Like The Rock does not look like a small town sheriff in absolutely any planet, right? Like no small town sheriff looks that big. And like I like that everyone in this movie kind of looked like actual people in a small town, as opposed to like one person's Megan Fox, one person's The Rock, and then the remainder of the cast is just like just random like background looking actors. But I thought that they did a great job of casting throughout the movie for this.
Yeah, because even saying that, like, Elizabeth Banks and Nathan Fillion, I think, are both like very beautiful, attractive people, but like, and they still look good in the movie, but they are dressed down to like small town hot as opposed to Hollywood hot.
Yeah, and it was a great way that they did it, because I'm like, because I love Nathan Fillion too. I love his Elizabeth Banks as well. But yeah, they just look like they fit right in. They didn't look and they just didn't look unbelievable in the small town. I loved it. And neither do their characters too, because they really nailed that. Have you been watching any of James Gunn's newer stuff, like Guardians of the Galaxy, most recently the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker?
I haven't seen Peacemaker, which I would really love to. I've seen the intro because that is very funny.
It's amazing.
We're like terrible at catching up with TV. We like need to get better about it. But yeah, I mean, I think Guardians is a lot of fun. I'm not like as into Marvel as a lot of other people are, but I think that is like one of the stronger Marvel movies. And yeah, I thought Suicide Squad was really fun too. I think we enjoyed it like much more than we expected to. I love Idris Elba. I thought he was fantastic in it, so it was perfect for me.
Yeah, I love it. I love the cast, and I was excited as soon as I saw Idris Elba was like connected to the movie. And then, yeah, I just like the freedom that they gave James Gunn for that movie. I think you'll really like Peacemaker. I don't want to spoil it for you. I just finished that series. The opening is hilarious, especially within context to how the series plays. Like the opening itself is really funny. Did you hear about Alan Tudyk in reference to the opening?
No, I didn't.
Oh, this is one of my favorite like pieces of trivia that came out of this. So the choreographer that's made the dance for it wanted to make a dance that was very easy for the cast to learn, and they had to play like deadly serious. But in order to do that, because it was the pandemic, she didn't have too many people to like get to practice the moves. So the person she got to practice the moves was her husband, who was Alan Tudyk, which is like one of my favorite. And then James Gunn posted pictures of it, of like him like helping out when there was like no cast or just him, like helping out choreographing of the dance, which is such a funny like little bit of tidbit of the show.
Oh, that sounds just like adorable. I would love to watch that.
Oh yeah, there's some clips of it, I believe. I'll try to find them for the show notes, but there's just pictures of him. I know that I saw those, and like, what a hilarious story to connect him to the show.
Oh, he's good people. I love that.
Yeah, he does not miss. Like, it's so funny how many little things, like the little voice acting he does in like, I think Moana is like where he's the chicken, I think it is. It's like really random things too.
Oh,
on top
whoa.
of like 1,000 different things. Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's really funny. And yeah, and it's funny, like the connection with him and Nathan Fillion because of Firefly.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
Yeah, I like James Gunn's style of continuing to work with the same people throughout his like career. And they seem to fit in to like each one of it. Like it doesn't seem like kind of forced nepotism for a lot of them, but like it just a lot of them, like Michael Rooker, for instance, was great in this movie. I think he's like a great villain in this movie, but he seems to fit in his other stuff too.
Yeah, and I mean his character is so funny even before like, you know, alien things begin to happen. Like he dresses like the nerdiest man alive, but then he's also like maybe kind of like a rich misogynist jerk. And I'm just like, this is like, what are you doing here? And it's like, it's kind of different from Rooker and how we've seen him in other things. Like I watched, you know, Walking Dead for a really long time and stuff. And so like thinking back to like some of those characters, I'm like, oh, you're still doing kind of like your gruff, like tough guy thing, but you're doing it in like a very different way here.
Yeah, I think he really shines in this movie. I think he's a kind of a standout, very interesting character actor. But I thought like in this movie, rewatching it now, seeing like stuff like you mentioned, like The Walking Dead, and seeing I guess Guardians of the Galaxy and other things that he's done later on in his career. Looking back at this one, I'm like, oh man, this guy, he's just a very particular character actor. I'm always excited to see in really random stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Not too much of a brag thing, but I have to put this in here that a friend of mine, Gabriel Carter, who's an actor, actually upon first time meeting him, he gave me one of the slugs that was a prop from this movie. It's one of my favorite horror memorabilia props that I own.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. Do you own any horror memorabilia?
Not really. I mean, we have like tons of like tchotchkes that are like horror things, but I don't think I have any like really good horror memorabilia. I remember like I dated someone who got me like a shadow box that had like the Reanimator like green needle inside, and it just said like break in case of emergency reanimation. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. I love this.
That's so cool.
I have like a couple posters like signed from like thing about like a Mystery Science Theater, like Joel Hodgson. He's a PA guy. So like he does a lot of like convention circuits around here and stuff. But I would love to like collect actual horror memorabilia that's like from sets and things. That would make my day.
Yeah, me too. And I feel like It's funny because we just mentioned our earlier, before we got on here, we were talking about our mutual friend, Amber from Hornblood Fire, the podcast, as well as the Instagram page. When I was talking to her, she was talking about like being part of the horror community. And I never really thought I was part of a horror community until she brought that up. And then I started talking to you a little bit and some other people. One thing I love about the horror community is just like to be able to like the freedom to talk and be on each other's podcasts and stuff like this. But one thing that kills me is following a lot of the horror accounts and seeing how much cool horror stuff they own in their house or shirts or memorabilia. And I'm like, I have such FOMO. And like, I just feel like I'm missing out.
I know what you mean. And I feel like my partner and I probably buy like so much useless stuff. Like he is really into collecting like Godzilla memorabilia because we've gotten really into Godzilla movies. And so like we have so many different Godzillas in our house now. And I'm like, this is so weird, but like it's fun. And like when our friends come over, they really enjoy it too. Like if they get it, like when my family comes over, they're just like, what is this? Why do you own like another one of these weird looking toys? But
it's so awesome.
Yeah, it's good for like, conversation pieces and stuff. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned the horror community too. I feel like that's something that's like, I've realized a lot more during the pandemic. I feel like it's something that has helped sustain me throughout this like rather depressing couple of years now.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's definitely made me appreciate the genre, but as well as like the community, because I feel like that everyone seems to be easy to talk to. And I feel there's just a lot of fun stuff to talk about within the genre as well. Right. So it always works out.
Yeah. It's always like energizing having these conversations. I'm like, oh yes, this really just reminds me why I love this again, which is great.
Yeah. When you're watching this movie, was there any like scene that like do you have a favorite scene from this movie? Like watching it again?
Ooh, favorite scene.
Or like a scene that stood out really. Cause I'm just like thinking a couple of scenes that like stood out to me. I was just wondering if you.
I mean, definitely when they open the shed and find the woman in there, who is like about to burst.
Yeah,
I think about that all the time, and in my head, it's funny. I thought I remember her being like much smaller, like still like large, but she is actually like a balloon.
Yeah,
and so. Even like watching it this time, I was like, oh, I somehow like made this smaller in my head, but he really goes for it in a way you don't actually expect.
Yeah. And then what follows too, right? Like it goes from like that, her exploding and turning into like a zombie movie too, was because I was watching with my wife for the first time and she hadn't seen it. I'm like, oh man, you're in for a ride here. Cause I forgot that it like goes for her she didn't know what was going to be in the shed. I'm like, oh, this is going to be interesting for you. And then she just jumped because she's a horror fan, but she just jumped. And then I'm like, oh, and it just kind of takes a twist from this. And then it continued.
Because that's like halfway through the movie too. And because we had to pause to like take my dog out or something. And I was like, oh my God, we still have like 45 minutes. I always thought that this was like an ending twist, but it's like, no, you still got half the movie left. And we're just like throwing this out at you.
Yeah, that's what I like too. Cause I'm like, oh yeah, we've got and I really like the alien not being fully explained, but kind of being explained. I enjoyed that aspect too.
Yeah, I feel like they give you like just enough information like that. The younger girl that they kind of team up with whose family gets attacked. I feel like her connection, she ends up kind of giving you a lot of the like background information that might be useful to know, which is kind of funny. I like noticed that. I was like, oh yeah, she's just like kind of telling us what's going on through a lot of these really weird scenes. Yeah,
it was just this random exposition scene that seemed to work. And it's like seconds, like it's not seconds, but it's like a really quick scene too. When she first gets like attacks in the bathtub, like that's like when in the bathroom and attached to her mouth and everything, gives her the backstory of the creatures. I'm like, oh, and that's kind of it for like the explanations of everything to do with the creatures. Now they're connected to Grant.
Yeah, I mean, even the hive mind, I kind of forgot. As we were watching, I was like, oh yeah, and that's another thing this movie does.
Yeah, it's a very interesting movie that I'm surprised isn't talked about as much as I would think with James Gunn, the popularity of James Gunn. And when I'm not going to spoil Peacemaker if you're going to watch it, but when you see it, there's a lot of connections to this and the Peacemaker TV series that when I watched this again, I was like, oh, this is really random. Like a lot of ideas were reused by James Gunn. Like he pays homage to himself in a way, which
that's so interesting.
Which I thought was interesting. I'll wait till you see the show because I know down the road you'll see it. But like, yeah, it's interesting to watch him like pay homage to himself and come full circle, really.
Oh, okay. That like makes me even more interested to watch that show, actually.
And it's another show of like the unconventional side characters really steal the show because there's about 3 or 4 of them that are just really get the best lines throughout it. John Cena's great and everything, but like everyone else in the show is a great group of unconventional side characters.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Of the movies that Slither paid homage to, was there like a favorite one? Because I know you mentioned The Thing, and there's obviously elements of The Thing in this, elements of Alien, and some other movies. Is there any movie that like from this that it paid homage to that you're just like, oh, that's awesome?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when we were watching this movie, I kept being like, "Have you seen this movie?" Like because I kept thinking of different things throughout it. One thing I thought of, and it's been a really long time since I've watched it, and it was the movie Society from 1989, I think it is, which I think is Brian Yuzna. And I mean, the endings are very, very similar in those two movies. So that was one thing that came to mind. But like, it's also because I think the body horror elements of both of these movies stand out really well. And I saw Society. It was the last movie at a 24-hour horror movie marathon that I had stayed like the whole time at. So I was like very sleepy and like disoriented when that came on, but the body horror elements of that are like the one thing I remember. And that's kind of like this movie too, even though I hadn't seen it in a couple of years, like those body horror moments always really stick out to me.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I kind of got stopped there. 24-hour horror film marathon. How was that like?
Oh, it's so fun. So yeah, there's this in Philly, there's this group Exhumed Films, and it's just like guys that have been collecting like 35 millimeter reels of like really weird things. And so they do tons of different events that we've gone to. We haven't gone like since the pandemic, but they are luckily still doing some showings. But they always do a 24-hour horror movie marathon every year. And usually there's like some sort of theme. They give you some clues beforehand that are very hard to guess. But you know, I think I've seen like, and that's probably why I like B movies so much too, is I've seen a lot of weird horror I like never would have heard about if I hadn't gone to these marathons. Like there's Night of the Demons is like another 80s movie that's like one of my favorites, and it's so weird and strange, but like I only know about it because of this marathon. It's definitely changed my taste as a horror fan.
That's awesome. It feels like there is always as no matter how much you watch, you talk to another horror fan. Like I'm feeling this right now. Like as I'm talking to you, like, oh man, I haven't seen Night of the Demons. Like I feel like I should, and I definitely will check it out. But I'm like, when I speak to other horror fans, I'm like, oh man, that's something I should check out. So that's why I love that. I love hearing about new movies new old movies, I should say that way.
Yeah, there's always like more things to add to my watch list, which is really encouraging. But also sometimes like infuriating. Like one of my life goals is to try to watch every 80s horror movie. Ooh. And the more people like bring movies up to me, I'm like, oh, damn, that's another one I didn't know about. Like I'm never going to actually complete this goal because there are so many.
Yeah. Do you mean every 80s like horror movie, Hollywood horror movie, or every 80s from across the world?
All of them. Oh, every 80s horror movie. It's probably never going to happen, but that's my one goal.
I don't know. I think you can pull it off. I'm assuming you've seen all the major ones and you've just got really obscure ones to go through.
That's kind of how it feels. I'm sure there's like one or two like weird ones that I haven't, like it's ones that I should have seen that I just haven't, but nothing I can think of at the top of my head right now.
What would be your favorite one?
My favorite 80s horror movie?
Favorite 80s horror movie?
Ooh. I mean, it's probably John Carpenter's The Thing, but also very closely tied with Reanimator, because those are two of the movies that really got me into horror in the first place.
Yeah.
But then I'm also like, you know, I write about Cronenberg. Like Cronenberg is my guy. So like Videodrome and The Fly are up there too. It's so hard.
Yeah, it's definitely The Fly is my favorite, I'd say, like overall. And I feel like a cliche for saying that because it's actually funny with 80s horror movies. They're all so well known amongst the horror community that choosing any single one of them, and they're all so cool. They're all so influential throughout this genre, other genres, style and everything, that choosing any single one of them is like choosing the like Michael Jordan is your favorite basketball player. Do you know what I mean? They're all their own Michael Jordan. They're all their own best ever, right? Like, so it's no real, well, it's funny with all classic horror movies that way. I'm like, any one of them you choose, it's like, well, yeah, that's like the best of that thing. But yeah, it's just such a great genre that way.
And every time I rewatch them, I'm like, oh, yep, it's even better. Like every time I like watch the thing, I'm like, oh, there's something else I picked up on. And now it's, yeah, even better than I remembered. So how am I like ever going to pick anything else?
Yeah. And it's especially the thing, it's interesting to hear that like that movie didn't do well originally. Like, what?
Yeah.
But how?
Videodrome is the same way too. And I know that's like not everyone's favorite Cronenberg, but that's the one that got me into Cronenberg.
Yeah.
And whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh God, like you poor like people, like these are two of like your best films. I can't believe these didn't do well. You deserve so much better.
It breaks my heart for the filmmakers of the time. I'm like, you had a vision, you nailed your vision so well that it's like lasted the test of time. So even though we have the best like CGI and whatever, now it's like this movie still lasted the test of time, and it's like, and it didn't do well. I was like, man, my heart be broken.
I know, right? And like I have a collection of like Cronenberg interviews that I have been reading through. And I remember like he talks about being so upset when the Videodrome didn't do well. And so then he just decides to do the Dead Zone, and like his heart was not in that project at all. And I think there's like a fair amount of horror fans that really dig that movie. It's not my favorite, but I think that's also because like I can feel that Cronenberg's heart isn't in that movie, and it just like breaks my heart when I watch it.
Yeah. That's rough. I know like retroactively, I guess like now he can see like having a cult classic, I feel is maybe even better than having a hit. Like I'm sure financially, maybe they'll argue, but I guess there's like residuals and such that pay that all equals out in the end. But like I think having a cult classic, and I say this as like a screenwriter myself, that if I wrote something that was a cult classic over if I was hired to write a Marvel movie, I think I'd like that more.
Especially like whenever we do the like Killer Bees podcast, I feel like there are so many actors we even have quotes from that are like, God, I can't believe there are so many people like today that like love this movie I did like 30, 40 years ago and like are so excited to talk about it with me. And I just never would have expected that. And that always like warms my heart so much, where I'm like, oh yes, like the horror, that's like how the horror community is. We like grasp onto these people and we're just like, I love you. You're incredible. Like, of course I want to talk to you about this thing you did 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's what's it's the beauty of the genre too, that I feel that there's a lot of, it just matters if it's like scary or if it's interesting, right? Like it doesn't like, and they'll just like fall in love with the people that are in the film or like that made the film to the smallest minute detail, as opposed to like, oh, it like has, we just like, there's a lot of stuff of just like falling in love with the actual aspect and creation of the film as well as the film, as opposed to other outside forces, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree.
Yeah, I feel that we're in this strange requel era right now, but I'm kind of okay with some of it. Like I liked the last Scream, for instance. I liked, there's requels that work and some that don't work. It's interesting. I would like to see, now I'm thinking of this, and also I'm like staring at a poster of Slither ahead of me here. I wouldn't mind a requel for Slither. And I'm like in a sense of like giving us something else more to this sort of James Gunn. I don't know if that makes sense, but like I wouldn't mind like kind of this style of movie to come back as I would like to see more of a horror like this. Yeah,
like requels of like pure kind of camp, I guess. I think that would be interesting for sure. And like, you know, I also want like, I was talking about this last night where we watched it and I was just like, God, why doesn't Nathan Fillion do more movies? Like, I know he does a lot of TV, but he's got such a unique screen presence that is like very charming and funny. And so like, even just for like bringing him back for the next one, I'm like, yeah, I'm on board.
Oh, absolutely. He is one of those guys that, cross my fingers here, that we never find out that nothing ever comes up bad about him, because he is actually just seems like such like a wonderful person that like, I'm like, I'll watch him in absolutely anything. Cause I'm like, you just seem like the nicest guy ever. And you always just play kind of that character. And like, he has really random like cameos and things, like very random cameo in the Suicide Squad, random cameo in the show Big Mouth as himself. Like, it's just, I just love his presence, like you're saying. And I just would watch him in anything.
Yeah. So Nathan Fillion, please don't ruin this for us.
Yeah, please. I was just watching an interview recently of like Brendan Fraser about his like kind of comeback right now, and how happy he is with like just how the fans are treating him and everything, and how like how much it like warms his heart and everything. I'm like, what a wholesome guy that way. Like I love to see like the love back to communities that love you too from film stars.
Yeah, I mean, one of my very best friends, Sam, loves the Mummy movies, and she's someone I always think of when he comes up or like those movies get brought up. And so when he had his comeback, I was just like, "Oh my God, Sam, I'm so happy for you!" Like, and she was like, "I know this is like one of the best things that's ever happened to me."
Yeah, I love it. I love that his comeback is like a lot of it's based on just pure love, like from an audience, just loves to see the guy on screen. So now they're like, we'll put you in anything. And he's kind of getting these like really weird superhero things. I'm not sure if you've watched Doom Patrol, but it's like an odd show. And he's like,
oh yeah, I've heard good
robot the whole time.
Things from some coworkers.
Yeah, it's very, very odd, very much very campy, very campy, very, very campy. And you just kind of wonder how like it seems like they write it like they plan to get canceled. Because like, oh, like not canceled for being like controversial, but canceled just by this is such a batshit idea. Like every episode feels so insane that way.
Yeah, like can we do this? Is this fine?
Yeah. And I love things like that, which is why like I kind of chose this movie. Because I'm like, oh, this is such a weird batshit idea. And I love brave movies that way. Like Titan was another one that I saw that was like, this is such a insane idea, and I just love those insane idea movies.
And I feel like I, as a horror fan, didn't think that I enjoyed movies that were like kind of just gross for the sake of being gross. But then like when I see movies like this that are this fun, I'm like, oh yeah. Like when I remember when this came out and I wasn't into horror when it first came out and being like, oh, why would anyone see a movie like this? And then when I got into horror and I watched it, I was just like, oh, this is a ton of fun. It's like really silly. I can laugh at it. Like some of the stuff is gross, but even those moments are really fun, especially if you're watching it with people. It's like there's tons of things to enjoy about this.
Yeah, like well, actually, just to that exact token, it's very much I love the social aspect of the genre. It is definitely like more fun to watch with friends.
Yeah, I know, and that's like I feel like we're still like, we don't go to the movies as much as we did pre-COVID. And we used to do like those, 24-hour horror movie marathons. We also have like Mahoning Drive-In up here. So they always have like really awesome screenings of different horror movies in the summer. And I just miss that part of the community, like watching movies like that with a bunch of friends that are all going to like react and laugh and goof off at the same moments.
Yeah. It's just so much fun. Since you mentioned going to the movies, I saw that you saw the Batman.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Like we came out of the movie and I was sitting there and there was like lots I was enjoying. And then by the time I got to the end, I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this. And I don't even know if I can totally pinpoint the parts that like don't really work. Mm-hmm. I think the thing for me is that everyone was like talking about like, oh, we finally got like noir Batman. Mm-hmm. But I feel like there have been so many iterations of Batman very close together that have been dipping their toe into noir or like have some of those elements or like, they'll like look very similar in that like kind of like very dark kind of color palette that they choose. And so like when I saw it and I was there, I was like, yeah, like noir Batman's cool, but it's not that different from some of the stuff we got. And there's a lot of things I do like I come from a criminal justice background, and I'm very like restorative justice minded. And so I really love all of the elements of like weeding out corrupt white men in power, like trying to get them out of our system. Even just the conversations with Zoe Kravitz and Robert Pattinson, where like she's talking about like, oh, like you're obviously a person of privilege and rich because like you wouldn't make these assumptions about people like if you actually knew what it was like to live this way. So there was some really good like social elements that like Batman had to kind of like confront as a capitalist pig. So those elements I really liked. I felt like maybe the last like half hour or so kind of dragged on for me a little bit. And I didn't find that last that last big like climactic moment to actually be that interesting compared to the other stuff the movie was setting up. I think that being the, without giving too much away, that being like the Riddler's like final big move didn't totally work. So yeah, I don't know. There's stuff I definitely liked about it. I really liked the performances. I thought Dano was fantastic.
Yeah, he was.
He's such a weirdo.
Yeah.
And I love how he just gets weirder and weirder whenever I see him in things. I think I maybe need to give it a rewatch too. It just didn't floor me the way I expected to when like all of the good reviews were coming out from it.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's interesting because I just came off of, not came off, like Monday, I recorded another podcast that's going to be coming out soon about the Batman. So I just came off to talk about this movie, and it's there's a lot of stuff that you pointed out there that I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of agree with that. I can see that, but like there's a lot of stuff that worked for me and such. But one thing I did mention in the other podcast, and I think it's worth mentioning that and I like your perspective on the criminal justice side of it, is that, yeah, it's the first Batman movie I've ever heard them call him out for like white privilege, really, and being rich. I never in my life of Batman has that come up in any movie. And I was like, interesting. I'm surprised it's taken this long for it to come out. And even the first Batman that I saw where it's like, especially in the climate of like police brutality right now. And there was the first Batman where like he was brutalizing someone near the end of the movie, and all of the cops and everyone's like, hey, this should be happening. Previous Batmans were always like, oh, this is cool that he does this. And this is the first one I've ever seen. They're like, okay, you should not be doing that.
I agree. Yeah. And I mean, there was like a lot of interesting social elements that I felt like they did really well. I feel like maybe there were some others that I feel like I wish they had maybe either like not delved into or gone harder on it for it to work for me too. Like some stuff towards the end. I want to get like too specific and like give spoilers. But as far as like the corruption elements and definitely like the white privilege elements of his character, I'm like very glad that Batman had to finally confront some of these things. And if we get sequels with him, maybe we'll go harder on that, which could also be really interesting.
I think so. I think they may do that in the sequels. What I found interesting with everything you just said there is that they, as far as, because I didn't know that going into the movie, they were going to delve into that. And why I say that I didn't know that I find it interesting is that usually, and I'm sure you know this too as a person that's online, usually that's all I would hear about on social media is just like, oh, Batman went woke, Batman this. And I was like, I didn't hear that. And I was shocked. I was like, oh, really? I really thought I was going to hear more of that. When I saw the movie, I was like, surprised I haven't heard more about this, like being like, like getting slammed on like online.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point you make, because you're right. Like there are elements of this where I'm like, why hasn't part of the internet called this out? Like, are you all sleeping on this? What's happening?
Yeah, it's the first time. The only person I did see Ben Shapiro called it out, and I was like, I saw it before I went to see the movie, like but I saw that he called it out. That's the only person that I saw calling out. I was like, oh, I'm probably gonna love this movie then if it's going like it has elements like that. But outside of that, I didn't see like a flood that I usually see for every. It happens a lot, and it's happening a lot in horror now, and I'm especially not liking that when they're calling out like this horror movie's like going woke, because I'm like, okay, horror movies, all that matters is whether or not they deliver on the scary fun element, right? Like, so
yeah,
that's what I loved about the genre, is that like it didn't matter who the lead was. They could, black, they could be disabled, they could be trans, they could be whatever they could be, and that all that matters is that they were part of a movie that was scary. But now I feel like there's kind of the internet that's getting mad about that, and it's just
yeah, I know the internet and like fandoms just really can ruin so many things. As like someone who's like a part of, lots of those communities, including like Star Wars, which has some of the most toxic fans on the internet, probably. Yeah, I mean, horror, it's so funny when people bring it up, especially because it's like, there's always been social commentary in horror. Like, what are you talking about?
It's insane. Like horror and sci-fi are like the two genres that I love the most, right? It's what my blog West Coast Strange about is horror and sci-fi have such a history of like adding, like being the first things to add diversity, which was kind of funny watching this movie. I didn't realize, because I haven't watched the movie in so long, how not diverse this movie was.
Yeah.
Like going back and watching like 2006 movies, as opposed to like 80s movies, which I can even more so understand film industry wise. But like when I watched a 2006 movie, because it's not that long ago, I just realized that like, oh, there actually has been a shift in characters in movies in reference to that.
Yeah, I mean, the mid to early 2000s are such an interesting time for horror because it was almost like anti-diverse in a way that
Mhm.
like a lot of like you'd expect 80s to be. Like I remember when we went, my partner and I went through and we watched like all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies back to back. And we finally got to Freddy versus Jason and we were just like, how is this the most racist Freddy movie? Like this is from the 2000s and like this is like the cringiest of all of these movies. Like
Yeah.
what is going on here?
It's interesting how like the other I feel like you're saying like the older ones just didn't they weren't strangely weren't as I guess there were a lot more
Yeah.
sexism, but like the mid 2000s for whatever reason was a very weird era.
Yeah, some strange. I mean, there's some good stuff, but there's like, it's like, why did we decide this was fine for this time?
Yeah, and I feel that there's now I do like that I'm getting a lot more different horrors from a lot of different voices now, which I think is like which is making for a lot of different like great horrors. But that's one thing that switched over to, I guess, like before a lot of horror was just directed just by white guys, but now we're getting a lot of different voices, which I'm enjoying.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many stories to tell, and it just makes me like again like so proud to be a part of this community and just like be like, oh yes, like there are so many great voices here, and it just feels much more inclusive than like I guess like other communities and fandoms, you know.
Yeah, Star Wars has got to be a rough one though.
Especially being like a female Star Wars fan.
It's gonna be a rough one.
I know I have Star Wars opinions that piss a lot of people off, and it's just like I just have to like lean back and be okay with it.
Yeah, I felt so bad for the cast of like the newer Star Wars movies too, because I'm like, oh man, like you're getting death threats. So like I think we've passed the line when you're getting death threats.
There's also such cool stuff. Like there's a podcast I listen to called What the Force, and it's a female like hosted Star Wars podcast. But they go a lot into like Carl Jung and like the collective unconscious and Joseph Campbell and like mythology and how like all of how like mythology is tied to Star Wars. And like I can listen to that and just be like, whoa, I love these fucking nerds. Like this is really hitting me in like my history, like mythology, like crux, and it makes me so happy.
That's so cool. What the Force? I'll put that down too in our show notes because I hadn't heard of that podcast. Because I'm a casual Star Wars fan. Like I've seen all the movies. I haven't seen all of the animes. My cousin's the biggest Star Wars fan in the world. Well, not in the world, but he's a huge Star Wars fan. Yeah. Did you get like were you like, no, he's not bigger than me?
No, I feel like luckily I'm not that. I feel like I also feel like being a casual Star Wars fan is probably the safest bet. But for me, like Star Wars was the thing I like watched with my dad when I was 5, like because he loved those movies. And so for me, that was just like a cool thing we bonded over. And I love the prequels because like I was like, I don't know, like 10 or 11 when those were coming out. I got to see Star Wars in the movie theater with my dad for the first time in my life. I'm like, this is the fucking best. And, then, it only got better when the cartoons came out, and the cartoons, I think, are like the best Star Wars, in my opinion, which is probably also an opinion that a lot of people disagree with. But
is it though? Like, I feel like a lot of people, like the cartoons especially, have progressively gotten a lot more of the fandom. I feel. No, I feel like that's like a lot. There's been a lot of love for the cartoon.
I think it's definitely gotten better for sure. I think there's probably still like a fair amount of people I talk to that haven't like dipped their toe in, and maybe it is more like maybe it is potentially like more people that are like, yeah, Star Wars is cool. Like I'll watch a Star Wars or something here and there. But it's like, but yeah, once like I was like that too. And then when I finally delved into the show, I was like, oh damn, like this is like going into like a lot of like social messages and just like nuances of this world that I never would have thought of otherwise.
Yeah, one of my favorite Star Wars anything is and you'll know better than me, the Star Wars cartoons that came out in like 2005. They were done by, and his name's escaping me, the guy that did Samurai Jack.
Yes, we just watched those for the first time because they put them on Disney Plus a couple months ago. And the animation is gorgeous.
So good. The Mace Windu one where he loses his lightsaber is like one of my favorite scenes where he just like is like punching robots and like uses it for. I love that so much.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it looks incredible. It's really fun. We watched it in like, a night. It's like the length of a movie, essentially. So I'm like, oh, this is like just an easy thing to watch in a night. Yeah, it's so fun.
You're gonna kill me as a Star Wars fan. The guy with the multiple arms.
Oh, why am I like
Grievous? Is it
Grievous? Yeah, General
okay.
Grievous. Yeah.
I wasn't positive it was Grievous. I thought that like his best portrayal that I've seen personally was in that cartoon, as opposed to like the.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, and like Grievous gets like a really good episode in Clone Wars actually too, where you get some background onto like what his life was like before he's like kind of the I don't know, like coughing, like gross like person wielding lightsabers that he is later on. You're like, oh, this is what you started as? That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's because it's the guy that did Samurai Jack. I mean, he just like is so good at that animation and fight scenes in that animation style too.
Oh, it's insane. Samurai Jack was amazing, and so was Primal. Did you see Primal?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I recommend it. I didn't see the second half of it, so I'm talking a little bit of my ass. But the first part of it, first half of the cartoons, where it's of this. Do you know of it, or from my?
No, I haven't even heard of this before, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's this cartoon about, I'm pretty positive it's name's Primal. It's a cartoon about a caveman, and this caveman befriends I think it's a T-Rex. I think it's a small T-Rex.
Oh.
He befriends a dinosaur, and they're like teamed up together, and there's no dialogue in it the whole time. And they just fight off against like giant bats and different like weird prehistoric monsters.
Oh yeah, I just looked it up and just immediately I'm like, ooh, this animation is incredible. Yeah, I should watch this.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I need to finish it, but like the first part that I saw I think it was the first couple episodes I saw were amazing. There's a lot of horror elements too, which I'm always a fan of.
Oh, cool. This is great. I'm so excited to watch this.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else we need to cover for Slither, but I feel like we did like a pretty decent job of covering parts of Slither before delving off here, which is usually what happens, and I enjoy to hear it that way. One thing I did want to mention, because we have a mutual, this is like, I did some like research as far as like social media and stuff like that, and like saw like some of our mutual things we had here. I saw that you, because I'm going to follow you on Twitter, but I just randomly saw this, that you met Ian McKellen.
Yes, I did. He did Waiting for Godot on Broadway with Patrick Stewart like 8 years ago. And I got to go to the show and see him. Amber like actually messaged me about it today, and I'm like, yes, he is one of two of the fellowship I have met. I also got to spend a weekend with Sean Astin, which was very cool.
How was that?
It was amazing. My friend randomly did a play in like in the Catskills, and my friend was the stage manager, and she's like, hey, if like you come down and hang out with me for a weekend, like we can legit like hang out with Sean Astin. And I was like, well, I'm sold. That sounds amazing. Sure. And he's just the sweetest person. He's like legit like a Labrador dog. Like he's so friendly and sweet and nice, and it just was like so affirming for me as a Lord of the Rings fan.
He's got that another guy like Nathan Fillion, like sort of, and Alan Tudyk, like sort of energy where I'm like, you just seem like a nice person, like at all times.
I know. And he was telling some story, and he just like very like nonchalantly was like, oh yeah. And I was like staying with Elijah in New York, and I was like, oh my God.
It's so when you're like celebrity saying, it's like, oh, crossover event. Like, wait, you work together, you guys are friends. Like that's funny.
I know, it makes me so happy.
It's funny because I mentioned Ian McKellen too. I was background in the movie X-Men 3, and he was on set a lot when I was there, but I didn't get to meet him. So I was really jealous you got to.
That's cool. Yeah, because you're in California, right?
No, I got this a lot. I'm in Victoria, which is just outside of Vancouver.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Same time zone. So
yeah, that's true. I've only had a layover in Canada. I've never actually been, which is unfortunate.
Oh, really? Layover in Toronto, I'm assuming?
I think it was in Toronto. My dad lived in Sweden for a while, so we had like a layover there until we like got to Sweden.
Cool.
But yeah, I've always wanted to go. It seems lovely, and especially since it's pretty terrible in the US. I'm like, if I just like cross over the border,
by all means,
slightly nicer.
Yeah, by all means, come to Canada. I think like our restrictions are lifting. Yeah, so like visiting Canada, and I live on the West Coast, so it's like warmer here. It's the less like snowy part.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
that sounds good. I'm in Philly, so it's like a little bit better. But being from Massachusetts, I'm like very used to just being cold and miserable for like 4 to 6 months out of the year.
Oof. Yeah, we just got a lot of rain. So we look like Gotham. Like, that's what it looks like for a lot of the year. But
I do love rain, actually. I like just like chilling out in like rainy weather. So that sounds great.
well, there you go. The West Coast. The West Coast.
Gotta get it.
Yeah. All right. So just to wrap up here, I wanted to ask this one final question. What horror movie are you looking forward to see this year? Or is there one that you're looking forward to see?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to reference my my to be watched list on Letterbox that I made. I feel like there's a few that I'm really excited for. I'm just trying to like think of what they actually are. Oh, well, I love Alex Garland. So I am very excited for Men. I don't know much about it. The trailer that was released was very vague, but it seems to be like a young woman, maybe being stalked by men or something like weird is going on. But yeah, Alex Garland is like one of my favorite modern like sci-fi directors. I think he's fantastic. So I think Men is going to be very cool.
Yeah, Men does look really good. Men looks good. I like the vagueness of it too. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, Nope is another one I'm looking forward to as well.
Yeah, I've watched the trailer a couple times for Nope. Think like just being like, is there any other like piece of this that I can like maybe discern for myself from this? Which is probably no, but I'm very excited to see whatever Jordan Peele is going to throw at us next.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely anything he does next. It doesn't really matter what it is, or because did you watch Lovecraft Country as well? Like, I guess he produced that.
I didn't finish it, but I watched the first couple episodes, and like as someone who loves history, I felt like they did a really good job of like putting the like history elements of like Jim Crow South, and also like adding like horror sci-fi elements to it. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed a lot of that. In the first episode, there's like voiceover of James Baldwin talking as they're going through like a sundown town. And I was like, oh my God, this is just like incredibly made. I would like to finish that show at some point.
It's really good. I learned a lot actually about a history I didn't know about from the States too. So it was fascinating because I think that I might be getting this mixed up with Watchmen now, the opening episode. That's the Tulsa Massacre was referenced in this show.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, because I didn't really know about that as much because we don't learn as much about what happens in the States and Canadian schools, as you can imagine. So yeah, there's like a lot of history that I kind of like, and I'm one of those people that like hear something that I like look it up more. So yeah, it was a fascinating show. It was a really good, has some weird sci-fi elements to it as well. Yeah, kind of covers everything.
And it's like I love this because I do like the writing of Lovecraft. I don't like Lovecraft as a person.
Yeah.
But I also love that a lot of people have been taking Lovecraft on, and like using that like cosmic horror base as a way to talk about race and like other interesting elements. Like I've seen like some I've read like a whole anthology of like women like kind of taking his horror and doing their own thing with it. There's a writer, N.K. Jemisin, I love. She's a sci-fi writer. She's also kind of done that as well. So it's like I'm glad that like we are taking that and like reclaiming it in a new way.
I love that. I do love that. I love that like forever too, that his name, like, because obviously I don't even want to say problematic, a racist sex person. And I love that forever his name is going to be connected to these different people of color and women that like, you know what I mean? Forever, like their works will be, his name is going to be connected to these powerful writers that he would never want to even speak to. Like, and I like that made creating mythology in that sense.
Yeah, that is like very delightful to me.
Yeah. So where can we find you online?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, the Neon Banshee, same name, I'm pretty sure, on my Twitter, which I just got onto Twitter for the first time. God help me. So yeah, you can find me there. I write for Movie Jawn, both the zine and the blog. And then you can also find my podcast, Killer Bees, that I do with my partner, Garrett, and talk about really cool actors that you should know more about. Cool.
I will definitely show that all in our show notes here. You can find me on, audience can find me on West Coast Strange, at West Coast Strange, on both Facebook as well as Instagram. And find me on Twitter as well. I have to ask, actually, because I have you here. How did you come up with Neon Banshee? Is there a story behind that?
I wish there was something like better than the actual story, which was just that I was about to get a legit job and was like, oh crap, I need to like change my name so that way it's not just my name, and like maybe my employer could just like find whatever weird shit that I'm posting about.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like, you know, I love the Neon Demon and stuff, so I just started playing with words that I liked, and I made the Neon Banshee.
Yeah, it's a cool handle. I was just wondering, I'm like, it's a really cool handle.
Oh, I'm glad that you like it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tori. I really appreciate this. I'm so excited to have you on here. Yeah, thank you so much. I know I'm saying thank you a lot. I'm Canadian. I apologize.
No, I say thank you. And I also say I'm sorry a lot because for some reason I need to apologize for just existing as a person. So.
Well, you'll fit right in Canada if you ever come visit, because that's all I do is say sorry and thank you.
Oh, perfect.
On to the next time. Thank you so much again, Tori, and I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.